Welcome back, everyone. We're really happy to have you all today for this third day of the CCHCSP annual symposium. A few changes in the schedule that I just wanted to highlight. This first session will be an hour and a half, and then we're going to have a break until 2:10 Eastern time. Because we want to be part of a healing ceremony that has been organized by the Vancouver School Board, and they're going to, in remembrance of the 200 children that were found at the Kamloops Indian residential school site. This remembrance and healing process ceremony will be held on YouTube, and it's going to be between 2:10 and 2:30. So we really ask you all, and invite you all to join us in that healing process, and then we'll resume with the poster session. Was it the poster session? We'll resume with the poster session at 2:40 instead of 2:20. So there's going to be a slight delay in the poster session. Of course, we'll have the third year TED Talks just after this session. So in between, we'll have the poster session, the TED Talks. Sorry for the confusion. So this session, and then the third year TED Talks, then the healing ceremony, and then the poster session. So we're really happy to have a great array of speakers and presenters today to look with us at the review quality in peer reviews. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Sammy Nag, Senior Advisor at the College of Reviewers at the CIHR, who's going to present the people today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome to this presentation on review quality and peer review, and introduction to CIHR's review quality assurance process. As mentioned, my name is Sammy Nag. I'm a senior advisor in the College of Reviewers at CIHR. And today we are pleased to have Dr. Norman Rosenblum as part of this presentation. He is the scientific director for CIHR's Institute of Nutrition, Metabolism, and Diabetes. He is also a professor of pediatrics, physiology, and laboratory medicine and pathobiology at the University of Toronto, and he is a pediatric nephrologist and senior scientist at the Hospital for Sick Children. You may also know that Norman founded and led the Canadian Child Health Clinician Scientist Program from 2001 to 2012. Dr. Rosenblum is deeply engaged in developing and managing career development programs for clinician scientists, and he brings a tremendous wealth of expertise in peer review, with close to 30 years of peer review experience reviewing and chairing scientific panels at CIHR. We are also pleased to have Adrian Mota join us as part of this presentation. Adrian is the Associate Vice President of Research Programs Operations at CIHR. In his role, he is responsible for ensuring that CIHR supports and advances the highest international standards of excellence in health research. One of Adrian's responsibilities is the work of the College of Reviewers, through which Adrian has a leadership role in implementing quality assurance practices in peer review for all reviewers in order to promote advancements and integrity in CIHR's processes. We are also pleased to have from CIHR, Nadia Martino and Mary Fraser Veliket, who along with Adrian will help to respond to your questions. Now, before we begin, I would like to recognize that this meeting is being hosted from Ottawa, which we acknowledge is in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial, and who are the traditional guardians of this land. We pay respect to all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from coast to coast to coast for their past and ongoing contributions to our society. I will make this presentation in English. However, please feel free to ask any questions you have in English or in French. So our presentation today is divided into 3 parts. First, I will be giving a short overview of CIHR and CIHR peer review. Norman will then present the importance of review quality and emerging factors in peer review. Then I will discuss the new Review Quality Assurance Process, RQA for short at CIHR. We'll then take questions and answers from the period on the first part of this presentation. In part 2, I will be presenting a list of do's and don'ts in peer review. Norman will provide his personal reflections as a reviewer and as a chair as it pertains to reviews. We'll then have a short interactive polling session that tests your ability to identify appropriate and inappropriate language in reviews. Finally, in part 3, we will discuss the results of the review quality checklist that you have applied to the reviews you have done for this presentation. I would like to state that this forum is a safe space, and we hope that some of you will take this opportunity to present your results. I'll also present a high-quality review on the application that we provided to you. And then we will finish with a final question and answers period. Please submit your questions you have during this presentation on the chat or raise your hand and we will get to them during the Q&A. So, a little background on CIHR. CIHR stands for Canadian Institutes of Health Research. It is the Government of Canada's health research funding agency, and it supports more than 13,700 researchers and trainees. Our funding is directed with a multidisciplinary approach, funding across 4 pillars of health research: biomedical, clinical, health system services, and population health. We are also committed to facilitate the translation of research results into action, along with our partners. The CIHR Act, which was written in 2000, is to excel according to internationally accepted standards of scientific excellence in the creation of new knowledge and its translation into improved health for Canadians, more effective health services and products, and a strengthened Canadian healthcare system. Now, there are 2 major funding mechanisms at CIHR. There are awards, and these funding awards provide direct salary support to individual research personnel or stipend support to individual research trainees. Open awards focus on master's, doctoral, and fellowship levels, including awards such as the Gold Leaf Prizes, which are among the highest honors bestowed on an individual or team for excellence in health research and its translation into benefits for Canadians. Strategic awards, including the aforementioned levels, as well as studentships, chairs, clinician scientists, career transition awards, new investigator awards, etc. We also have open grant programs, and these are investigator initiated, and they support the direct costs of research projects, including for the training of researchers and their activities that support the translation of research findings. We also have strategic grant programs based on the scope of work and the objectives of the research. I'll give you a quick overview of the CIHR peer review process. This process is specific to a single-stage, committee-based peer review process. I have divided the process into 4 quadrants. As part of the first assignment stage, reviewers must first sign a conflict of interest and confidentiality agreement, as well as a standards of practice for peer review agreement, which captures the principles of peer review. I will go further into the latter agreement later in the presentation. Reviewers then provide us with the ability to review applications based on their level of expertise. The next stage is reviewing the applications at home. They are reviewed according to the funding opportunities adjudication criteria and submitted to CIHR through ResearchNet. At this stage, reviewers should be aware of the criteria that makes a high-quality review. These criteria are published on our website, and I will go further into them later in the deck. When the meeting takes place, applications are discussed, but some applications are streamlined based on their initial scores and the consensus of the committee. Finally, after the meeting, CIHR sends a letter of decision to all applicants, and the chairs and scientific officers provide feedback on the reviewers as part of the review quality assurance process, which we will go into further detail later in the deck. There are generally 2 types of peer review at CIHR: in-person meetings and virtual review. In-person meetings convenes a committee to discuss and rate applications. This can be done face-to-face or over teleconference. This is how the project competition is normally run. Now, due to the pandemic, all in-person meetings are now run virtually. That means they occur live face-to-face, but over Microsoft Teams. Virtual review stands for peer review, where reviewers do their reviews at home and submit them electronically, but discussions only occur in cases of discrepancies. This type of review is typical for most awards competition. So today's presentation is about review quality and peer review. And assuring review quality is one of the core functions of the College of Reviewers, which was formed back in 2016. It was created as a virtual resource that professionalizes peer review, enhances review quality, and provides a stable base of experienced reviewers. The vision of the college is to establish an internationally recognized, centrally managed national resource that supports excellence in peer review. One of our primary missions is to recruit and support reviewers across all areas of expertise, and to ensure that we have the right types of expertise to deliver the full range of funding competitions. Our values are based on providing reviewers the knowledge and resources necessary to conduct consistent, fair, and high-quality reviews. As of today, we have over 4,000 members enrolled in the college that are both international and national. In order to become a college member, and I encourage all of you to consider joining the college, you must have knowledge and experience within CIHR's mandate. You must have also performed at least 2 peer review roles at CIHR or another recognized organization. You must have an academic or professional appointment and hold at least 1 federally funded grant as a principal investigator. And you can find more information on the paths to join the college on CIHR's website. Now, the next few slides will deal with review quality. I'll ask Norman to present on its importance and discuss a few of the emerging factors in peer review. I pass it off to you, Norman.
Thanks, Sammy. Thanks very much. Wonderful to be with everybody today. It's like going home, even though I'm at home. Review quality is just a critical component of the entire system. In fact, without high quality review, the whole system of peer review is turned on its head and falls apart. And I think we've seen this in the history of CIHR, where more senior members of this community will remember when certain reforms were proposed that when they were perceived as interfering with the quality of peer review, that the integrity of our system was really questioned. And so I think this really highlights just how important this feature is. So several important concepts. Meaningful feedback. This is important with respect to what applicants receive in order to improve the quality of the research proposal and their skills. Now, I must say personally, I do not view this as the primary outcome of peer review. The primary motive of peer review is the adjudication in order to select the highest quality research for funding, which is indeed the mission of the agency, which is to fund the most excellent research and to see that it is put into action. On the other hand, I think CIHR is acutely aware that without a robust community of researchers who are enabled to put forward high quality applications, then our entire system is put into question. And moreover, I think as Canadians, we have an ethos that we would like to be helpful to each other versus the opposite of that, which is to give each other as hard a time as possible through the instruments that we have in order to undermine each other. I don't think that's our motive. So I think it's very, the ways in which reviews are performed are critical to achieving both aims, which are funding, but also bolstering the community of researchers. And of course, the other very important element is that as a member of a peer review committee, one is often sitting with people you don't know and who don't know you. And in order to establish your credibility on that committee, your ability to review with skill is critical to, one, enabling other committee members to judge applications which they themselves have not read to the level of detail that you have read them. If you're the reviewer, there will only be one or two other people on the committee, probably two others, who will have looked at the application in great detail. And so they're going to really depend on you to see, can I depend on Norm to say things that I can really take to the bank and be able to compare this application to other applications that are very competitive on the in the panel. And so this is critical to help them, but also to establish your own credibility as a reviewer. Are you trustworthy? Do you give the kind of feedback that they can really depend on? We'll say a little more about that. The second issue is, we've already alluded to, upholding the trust and confidence in the integrity of the peer review system. This really validates the entire ethos of the system to the applicant, that the review was appropriate and professional in conducting their reviews. And we'll say things about the language that's used, the principles that are used in order to provide that confidence. And then augmenting the transparency of peer review decisions. I think this is absolutely critical. And this is totally dependent on the skill of the reviewer. Can you say things in a way where people understand why the score that has been generated was indeed generated? Because nothing will bother an applicant more, and nor should bother an applicant more, than to receive the score that is really inexplicable. And so this is really a reviewer's role, and of course the role of the scientific officer and the chair, to ensure that this occurs, whether the score is high or low. Next slide, please. So success of the peer review system is dependent upon the willingness and ability of all reviewers to exercise rigorous scientific judgment. This whole system that we have is based on the fact that we are saying we're able to judge outstanding from excellent, from very good to fair to poor. And so we need to demonstrate every time we sit at the table that we are able to exercise that judgment. And that means that we need to be specific and clear. But at the same time, as we're being specific, clear in our argumentation, in our critical analysis, we have to be fair, reasonable, and consistent. And fair and reasonable is very important, because this comes into all kinds of issues like productivity and what you consider to be reasonable and fair versus unduly harsh, or not taking into account context. And it has to do with the methods that are being used, the models that are being used. Are you demanding so much of what is being proposed that it becomes untenable? Those are just examples, but there are many examples of where fair, reasonable, and then consistency. There are going to be 3 reviews usually put forward for an application. Applicants do look for consistency of theme. Of course, these are often captured in the scientific officer notes in order to try to bring things together, but your peers will look to you to be consistent. That is, do you have a reputation for being unduly harsh or particularly harsh in one area, but on some applications, you're a real softie? What that brings into question is the entire basis on which your peers can depend on you for a reasonable peer review over all applications. So this issue of consistency, I think, is very clear, and to develop the language and the approach to make people understand the way your brain is working. So not implicit talk, but overt, explicit explanation. And to understand and take into account the particular context of each application, well, a great example of context would be COVID. Applications that came in during COVID. Of course, now we have a method by which applicants can explain the issues that have taken hold during COVID, and how this has affected their science and their ability to operate as an investigator. But it has to do with being an early career investigator, for example, or the particular context of the science that's being done. For example, there was a flood and all the mice drowned. That happened in New Orleans when there was a horrible flood there due to water main break. So these kinds of things are very important for reviewers to recognize and then to adjudicate. Reviewers' assessments that also strive to show clarity of analysis. So I think specificity versus generalities. I think generalities are very difficult to consume. Specificity is clear. It may be wrong, but at least it's specific. I think identifying the gaps in a research proposal are critical. Again, gaps are specific versus being, well, this was generally written in a way that wasn't so impactful. Well, what does that mean to anybody? A gap is the hypothesis was obvious. It didn't really expand upon what we already know to capture some exciting areas, some of which are actually addressed in the application, and so on. The specific aims, blah, 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 and so on. Articulate objectively so that it is not received constructively. This is very important. There are some reviewers who, with time, who are particularly expert in certain areas, and this is inevitable for every investigator over time becomes one of the most expert people around the table, is not to consume an application in a subjective sense in terms of their own views of a field, but to try to more objectively say, here's where we're at with the current state of knowledge, here are the gaps, here's how this application addresses those, and does this application do that successfully, and so on. Next slide. I think there's some emerging factors which are very important in peer review. First of all, quality of research design. You know, there's a paper in PLOS Medicine, I think it was, from about 10 years ago now, which described the design issues in animal experimental research, really primarily using animals. And it demonstrated in a horrifying way over thousands of publications how design was flawed, reproducibility, issues of objectivity, and so on and so forth, so-called internal and external validations. Design is critical. Reproducibility of analysis, lack of bias. These are increasingly emphasized. The N=3 experiment has come under much greater scrutiny than it used to. Impact factors. Impact factor is almost a word that you can't use now around the table. It used to be a code word for saying, it was sort of a general code word for saying whether I liked a publication or not, or thought it was worthwhile. This has been demonstrated to be have huge shortcomings. And indeed, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment from approximately 9 years ago, I think, was a very important document. CIHR adopted these principles, which were directed at investigators, institutions, and research agencies. And Dora talks about the way that publications are assessed, in part, and this is extremely important. My main message here, which I always said to my peers, did you actually read the publication, or did you just look at the number that was attached to it? And I think people deserve to have their work read. And there are a lot of fields where the actual number of citations is quite low because they're fairly small fields, but actually the value of the publication is very high, and the opposite is true. So this is extremely important. Many universities now do not allow impact factor to be part of the discussion for promotions, which I view as a very positive thing. Open sourcing. So this is the ability of the research to be open to the world. So this means that the data will be shared widely in many different aspects, and that the investigator has the connections and makes the pledges to do so. Very important. Sex and gender considerations, very topical, as they should be, because of course in the pathogenesis well, in the biology of systems, as well as the pathogenesis of disease, as well as the experience of disease, as well as the policies attached to disease. Sex and gender considerations are huge. They have tremendous influence. And now CIHR, at the core of its policies, has the requirement to deal with these. And then finally, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this really relates to, I think, two major facets that intersect. One is that CIHR's mission is the best health for all Canadians. And I emphasize the word all. And what that means is that we include the diversity of who we are. And of course, we can think of that globally, which of course becomes even more complex, but yet even in Canada, it's very complex. That means that people who are doing appropriate related research need to have a diverse lens and need to think about equity in terms of how will the effects of whatever you're dealing with on certain populations be dealt with in order to create equity. Inclusion includes including the right sources, but also involves the right investigators, an inclusive sense of investigatorship in order to create the appropriate human resource power to look into diverse populations with all that we know about how powerful that is. So we have the right kind of research, but it needs to be performed by the inclusive population of researchers and patients and other stakeholders in order to create the right kind of product, which creates equity and best outcomes for all. So those are important principles that I think have emerged and that investigators need to be very mindful about. And with that, I pass it back to you, Sammy.
Thank you, Norman. Very informative. Let's move into the review quality assurance process, known as RQA. This process is part of a performance management strategy that ensures the highest standards of review quality, as well as recognizing reviewer contributions. The RQA process begins with the standards of practice for peer review agreement. This agreement must be signed off on by all reviewers prior to peer reviewing for a competition. It also lets reviewers know the expectations in their role as a peer review member, and they must adhere to them throughout the peer review process. This ensures that the highest standards of excellence and integrity are maintained in the practice and management of peer review. The agreement consolidates the principles of peer review at CIHR, namely ensuring confidentiality, avoiding conflicts of interest, fairness in your peer review contributions, and transparency in the peer review process. It also outlines committee member expectations in performance and preparedness, and reviewers' responsibilities to supporting review quality excellence, namely submitting high quality reviews. I'll break that down in the next slide. Also, participating professionally, which means contributing constructively in discussions and demonstrating appropriate behavior, and being responsive to staff and adhering to competition timelines. As I mentioned in the previous slide, reviewers are expected to submit high quality reviews, and this can be defined and are operationalized by the degree they adhere to three criteria: appropriateness, meaning their comments are fair, understandable, and respectful. Reviews are expected to be robust, which means that they are thorough, complete, and credible, and have utility, which means they provide feedback that addresses the needs of reviewers, applicants, and funders. This definition was based on the synthesis of available evidence from a scientific literature review, international benchmarking analysis, peer review policy review, as well as a series of consultations with the research community and an independent validation. It is very important to note that the RQA process is not designed to ensure the validity of a scientific opinion that is expressed in a review. Comments are understood to reflect a reviewer's expert opinion, which is influenced by the scientific knowledge and/or experience of an individual reviewer. I'll add that the validity of the scientific opinions is addressed by other elements of the peer review process, such as ensuring appropriate reviewer to application assignments and participation in peer review committee discussions. The RQA process. We receive feedback from chairs and scientific officers on the quality of reviews from their committee members and their participation performance. We also collect feedback from program delivery staff who note the responsiveness of their committee members and validate the participation performance given by committee executives. The RQA team further analyzes the reviews of reviewers flagged by executives based on the aforementioned review quality criteria. The outcomes of the analysis focuses on intervening with those reviewers who are considered to be extreme cases, which, in terms of review quality, means greater than 2/3 of reviews from a reviewer failing a review quality criteria, or a severe review quality issue in one or more reviews. And in terms of participation, extreme cases are when reviewers receive multiple validated flags from committee executives. Now, interventions are meant to give reviewers a chance to improve through our support. This aligns with our philosophy of promoting continuous improvement in our peer review process. I will speak more about these supportive interventions in one of the next slides. Outcomes also include recognizing reviewers who give outstanding contributions to the peer review process. This can include submitting reviews that go over and above expectations, which mean they significantly aid both the applicant and the other reviewers. Reviewers are also actively participating in discussions on applications not assigned to them, and reviewers agreeing to take on additional tasks on short notice. Now, what we have found in recent RQA results are that the overwhelmingly majority of reviewers performed well. In fact, in the last project competition, only 4 out of 1,107 cases with major issues. These trends show a similar pattern in other recent project competitions. Now, what are some of the most common review quality issues found in our analysis? In 2019, the most common issues were comments that did not align with a given rating. For example, providing a score that suggested improvements were required, but none were listed. Another common issue was that reviewers failed to identify strengths and weaknesses for all of the adjudication criteria. In 2020, we found a common issue was that reviewers were scoring low, but not justifying the score with reasons. Finally, another common issue was that some reviewers failed to address all adjudication criteria in the reviews. I had mentioned earlier about supportive interventions. These are some of the ways that we support review quality. We disseminate broad communications that capture the most common RQA issues noted after each competition. These issues are listed on an infographic that is sent by email to college members and reviewers, as well as published on our website. We also send supportive letters directly to reviewers, explaining the issues and how to improve. We have developed learning modules that are published on our website, specific to review quality, unconscious bias, and participation. And we also have a monitoring system in place that follows the performance of reviewers across competitions. We also have enacted a recognition strategy, which highlights outstanding reviewers' performance in a special congratulatory letter, as well as acknowledging them at the institution level. Now, we have some time to take some of your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nag, and Dr. Zumblum for these great advice and knowledge transfer to us all. So you can use Pia is back, so I'll let Pia look at the questions with you. You can use the chat box or open your hand, put your hand up so we can see that you have questions.
One question in the box: will the fall 2021 competition be peer reviewed in person?
I don't know. I don't think we have an answer yet. Sorry, go ahead.
I think I don't know if Adrian Mota is online with us at this moment. I think he's the one who's holding the key to this question. Personally, I would be surprised. But is Adrian with us?
Yeah, hi everyone. I just went off camera during the talk. I enjoyed what you had to say, Norm and Sammy. Thanks for doing that. Certainly some wisdom in what you shared. But you know, this is an important question, right? And what I said to this on our university delegates call is that what you'll see in the coming weeks is that CIHR will launch the project grant program for the fall competition, fall 2021. And with that, there will be an announcement of what program parameters are being modified, if any. And you know, we're really conscious of what's going on right now with COVID, and while things are improving, you know, we're not there yet. And so what you'll see in that announcement, one thing that I can confirm today is that those fall meetings that will happen in December, we're planning for them to be done on virtually. As Norm said, without knowing, he'd be surprised if it happened. And it acknowledges that, look, you know, with the vaccinations going where they're going, I think we're all positive that, you know, we're all going to get our second shot, and things will hopefully go back to whatever they're going to go back to. But from CIHR's perspective, you know, we plan those meetings 6 months in advance, right? We're normally planning right now, booking all the hotels, booking all the air travel. And so we don't think it's prudent to plan for face-to-face meetings for this competition. And I don't want anyone to hear that as we've made decisions to go virtual for all our competitions forever. That decision hasn't been made. And what you'll also see in that message that we're going to share is that, you know, we've been surveying applicants, reviewers, chairs, and SOs for their experiences in the virtual process, but we're asking very specific questions about what do you think is good about virtual? What do you think is good about face-to-face? And tell us about that. Because there's pros and cons to both. I'm not here to advocate for one over the other, but you know, things are evolving, and that's something that we will share with you, the data from those surveys as we move forward to make a decision. Some of you may say, hey, I didn't participate in that competition. I have some thoughts that I'd like to share, and we want to hear from you too. So what you'll see is there'll be an open invitation to anyone who'd like to share their thoughts. Again, both positive and negative on both models, right? Like, we're really looking to hear from people and make decisions informed by what the evidence is telling us. So unfortunately, you know, no bad coffee in the Marriott basement, and you know, that's a bad joke on my part. I greatly enjoy interacting with people, as do many of you, I'm sure, but we're not there yet, unfortunately. And you know, like Norm, I would be surprised if we change direction on this. And again, it takes time to plan. So we're not there for this competition, but you know, the spring, we'll be talking about that one as we collect the data and as we see how we come out in the fall.
I think it goes with one of the questions that was asked, where there are differences in quality of the reviews between in-person review and virtual reviews. And what are some of the effects of in-person review that add an additional dimension to the review? So I guess this will be coming.
Well, I guess, you know, since that question is asked, I believe it's relevant, right? Like, I mean, people have seen likely data from the NIH is one that comes to mind around how reviewers have experienced virtual reviews. CIHR shared some data with respect to our first virtual competition. And, you know, anecdotally, we've heard that, as an example, you know, the interactions that we have in a format like this are not the same as face-to-face. You know, chairs and SOs tell us it's harder to pick up certain cues from the members, or to encourage people to, you know, your review has gone on long enough, it's enough. And, you know, obviously we all, you know, as I was listening to this conversation, my son was having his lunch at school, right? So, you know, is the quality better, worse, or different? I think we all could make certain conclusions about that based on our experience. I would say, you know, everyone gets the same review in this context. And we're doing a lot of thinking about that, right? Because some of what we've heard from people is, well, could you use some sort of hybrid model? Because some people like virtual, some people like face-to-face. Could you blend that? And I think there's a real question there around, is that fair to everyone? Because it's one thing to say an entire competition is being done virtual. It's another to say, is there a potential hybrid model that we can use, where some might be virtual, some might be face-to-face, or the spring competition is face-to-face, the winter is virtual. So those are all things we have to work through, and we are surveying. And certainly if people have ideas or experiences, we're glad to hear those. And I'm not trying to be negative about virtual and only highlighting some of the anecdotes that we've heard about how it operates, because we've also heard from some people that, it makes it easier for them to participate because they don't have to fly from Vancouver overnight and spend 4 days in Ottawa instead of the 2 or 3 that they're spending online. So that's what I'm saying about, there's pros and cons to both, and we need to understand those, because even if we adopt one model, there are potentially learnings from the other that we can apply in that context. One thing I think that CIHR is proud of is providing our policy on dependent care, right? If you're participating in peer review and you need someone to take care of your kids or your parents or whatever, we provide some money to do that. So if we go back to a face-to-face model, I think that's a policy that we would want to try and retain in that context, and we would have to work through what that looks like. So I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I'll stop there and glad to continue the conversation.
Another of the question is, can you speak about the reviewer in training program offered by CIHR? I understand this competition is very popular, and I'm interested to hear about the benefit of participating, and when is the best time in my career to participate?
I think Nadia would like to take a stab at this question.
Can folks hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So thanks for your interest in the reviewer and training program. So it will be launched again alongside the fall project 2021 competition. It is available to early career researchers. And the definition is holding a academic appointment within the first 5 years. And really you can apply within that time period. And the benefits of that is that it's evolved from a reviewer just participating, just by observing, by now actually having to work with a mentor and write practice reviews, as well as having the opportunity to present at the meeting for their assigned application, should the application not be streamlined. So we are hearing so far that it's enhanced the experience. So I would encourage everyone to apply. I'm also seeing another comment here about the observer program and opportunities for postdocs and PhD students. And so we do have another program that we've launched, and it's the postdoctoral fellowship review program, whereby PDF students review for the Doctoral Research Awards competition. And last fall, it was the first one whereby all reviewers were PDF students, and that went really well. So certainly there's an opportunity there. Also, we are looking to recruit ECRs as well to review for the Fellowship Awards competition. So if anybody is interested, please send an email to the college. And there's also other programs in the reviewer pathway, and I can send a link for ECRs. They certainly have the opportunity to, be part of the associate member program. So, there's an eligibility criteria there whereby you have to have an academic appointment. If you haven't had any peer review experience, you could participate in that program. And there's certain support mechanisms in that program whereby you can review fully for a project, let's say project competition, and have the option to request a mentor and a reduced workload. So I will share the link of the review pathway on the chat, and feel free to read up on it. And if certainly we can answer any questions, send them to the college inbox and we'll get back to you.
So Nadia, I'd like to hear from Norm on this too, because I mean, part of the question was about when someone should consider participating. And I know, Norm, you've done a lot of mentoring, you've done a lot of chairing, because I think the point about competitive is right? Like the program is oversubscribed, right? If you think there's 120 spots roughly, right? 2 per panel. And I think we got 400 or 500 applicants in the last competition. So we picked by lottery. So when you might want to go needs to be judged against, well, you're in the window for so long and there's a lot of interest. And I think that speaks to the comment further down about, can we also add PDFs? Because I mean, we do want to provide this opportunity to as many as possible, but there's limitations from a space perspective. And you know, everyone wants to see project. It's our flagship, but I think we can think about extending the program to other CIHR competitions where there's a lot of excellent peer review that goes on, whether it's the strategic, and Nadia listed a bunch of considerations if you want to review fellowships or doctoral awards or whatever. But Norm, your thoughts on maybe the timing of when would be optimal for an observer or for someone who's in their early career about when they might want to go to a panel and participate like that?
Yeah, my view is that earlier is better. I mean, so now I think we're talking about ECR specifically, Adrian, that you've asked about. So, you know, we're talking about someone who's finished all training, which means they have an extensive amount of training. The usual ECR has, you know, at least a doctoral level of training. What I mean is extensive research experience with conceptual background, whether or not that was coupled with a PDF or not. They've already done, you know, a reviewing of various sorts. But I think the benefit of getting into the peer reviews system, at least, not necessarily for years at a time, but at least for a shorter time in the beginning, is to get a reality test on what gets funded. I mean, let's remember what ECRs are facing is a highly competitive research ecosystem. That is the nature of health research. It's the nature everywhere. And so people need to get a sense of what's going to pass muster to get to the finish line. And there's no better way to get that than to be on a peer review panel and to see X number of grants discussed and to see what really gets funded. What levels of productivity are needed, you know, at various stages. What kinds of experiments, what kind of hypotheses, and so on and so forth. What looks excellent, but, you know, doesn't get prioritized. These are, you know, I think learnings that are not necessarily easy to come by in other contexts. At the same time, just as I say that, and recognizing that not every agency has a system by which people can become peer reviewers, and it's very competitive to do so, that participation in peer review in groups like the CCHCSP, like the local institution, like the local university, where a diverse set of applications are being brought forward, and maybe there are rules that they have to be adjudicated before they go out. This is a great system to participate in. My own institution, SickKids, has mandatory peer review for every grant, $50,000 and above, or above $50,000. I've been doing it for many years, and it's amazing to participate in that, not just for your own applications, but for other people's. Tremendous learning. So whatever way you can find to participate in this kind of activity, I think there's tremendous value. Adrian, is that specific enough in terms of what you were looking for in my comment?
No, that was awesome, Norm. I think that's great advice for everyone on the call as they think about the various ways to participate. I mean, obviously CIHR and the RET is one avenue, but you know, and I pick up the comment from Shannon in the chat, and thanks for making it, because I think it supports what's being said here around you reviewed for the fellowship program as an ECR, and it was helpful for you to prepare your own application, enhance competitiveness of your trainees, and you're encouraging others to do that. So I think that aligns perfectly with what Norm has said. So thanks for that, everyone.
I think one question to follow was when, you know, trainee participate to this review, do they receive feedback on the quality of their review? Just maybe to finish. this question.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, and so I am trying to answer the chat as we go along. Currently right now, we don't have the review quality program in place, but certainly something that we're thinking about in terms of expanding the review quality program to other CIHR programs. That's likely to come.
Well, and so Nadia, I think it's worth adding that, you know, the RQA that we do that we want to systematize, Nadia talked about, right? But there are other checks in the system with respect to, you know, if applicants provide us feedback with respect to reviews that weren't maybe up to standard, it's something that the college looks through. And we have started out reaching out to reviewers when, you know, we've identified issues with reviews. So people might get feedback that way, and I understand that's not the feedback people want to get because it means that maybe there was something that was deficient. But that's one thing. One other thing that I would draw attention to is that, you know, when we decided to use postdocs to review the PhD awards, that was based on pilots and data, right? Where what we were seeing is we started by matching people, right, postdoc to more senior colleague, and we found overall that the PDF reviews were very good. You know, that people really did an in-depth review, and we weren't judging is it right or it's wrong, we were judging the quality of the review. So I would say, you know, we want to get there where we're giving people very more feedback around the quality of the review, maybe how they align to their peers, which isn't necessarily the best indicator. But I would say the number one thing to keep in mind when you do reviews, especially in a program like fellowships, right? Because people get 8 and 10 applications, and you know, it's so competitive that, you know, what we see is there's a quick kind of separation of things. And people, the number one thing I see that comes across my desk is when people don't appropriately justify their rating. And that feedback going to a trainee about, you know, well, you're only a 3.5 on your productivity, and they're kind of thinking, well, I already have a paper here and I've done this and I've done that, and explaining to them that, well, it's relative to the stack that I have, right? Like, this is a competitive competition, and so yeah, you're solid, you're good, we've put you at a level that reflects that, but you're not at the level yet of your peers that are getting these national awards. And if you look, it's just interesting because it just happened. If you look at Twitter and the reaction of some people who didn't get the awards and some of the comments, it reflects that, a misunderstanding of why they got the rating they got. And so if you're not getting that specific feedback, I encourage people to think about that as the number one kind of comment that we get with respect to quality of reviews, not just in training awards, but operating grants as well.
I think that was the question of Ellen. Maybe she want to ask it.
Yeah, it was exactly one of the questions I had, because what's the mechanism that the investigator can reach to the CIHR to have their when they face harsh or non-scientifically based to their knowledge, or not fair review, like how should they process? Because often we just write to project grant, and then we have someone responding, but we don't have access to the president or to the SO person of that committee. So we cannot have a real discussion, and often we speak to different people, when we try to reach back to them. So what's the exact mechanism, and how do you deal with that with the reviewer after that? What happens to that? I understood that Dr. Nag was saying, that when you have major issues, you'll be contacted, but that's 2/3 of the applicants. So it means that a lot of other applications could have been not well reviewed, and the reviewer might not even know the impact of that bad review for the applicant.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Hélène. And I would say this. So a couple things. No matter who you write to at CIHR, we're going to deal with it in the same way and put it through our process. So a lot of people write to me directly. A lot of people write to the scientific directors. Some write to the president. Some write to the contact center. The best is always going to the contact center because it goes in the system and initiates the process. And that's what I do when it comes to me. I send it to the contact center, so we initiate the process, and it goes to the right people. right? And you know, let's keep in mind that, you know, when you have a success rate of 15 to 20%, 80% of people aren't getting funded, and there's some difficulty in that. And we acknowledge that peer review is a human process, right? So in a lot of the questions we get from applicants, a lot of them are a scientific difference of opinion, right? And we're not in a place to arbitrate that. And you know, if you think, sorry Nadia, if you could just maybe mute, I think you've got some background noise there. We're not arbitrating that, right? And we have things in the process built in, like the response to reviews, to deal with some of that, where it's clearly a difference of scientific opinion. And so we're not talking about that, but you can always raise that to us, because everyone that you send us, we put through this process and we look at to say, is it a difference of opinion? Is it that the reviewer missed something? Is it that our own system, you know, because we've had very few cases, but it's happened where ResearchNet doesn't provide the reviewer with something you put in your application. That happened once or twice or whatever, right? And so it's important for us to look into what happened. You know, I can tell you that we're probably not reversing a decision unless it's something procedural like that. But there are cases where a reviewer will admit they made a mistake or they missed something, and we'll go back and relook at it, right? Where it's like, okay, well, what score would you have given this? And we can adjust that way. So depending on the nature of what's raised, right, the team does look into it, and it might trigger that they look into more than just the review you're flagging, right? To say, okay, well, this reviewer, you know, maybe they didn't really justify their comments, and is that a trend in their other reviews, or did they just miss this one? You know, sometimes we see things where a reviewer cuts and pastes and, you know, uses wrong terms or is clearly referring to another grant. And that's human nature, right? I mean, a lot of reviewers work in Word and then paste their reviews into ResearchNet. So maybe they made a cut and paste error. There's a lot of things that could happen. And so, you know, we always make sure to explain to the applicant what we did, what our decision is, and, you know, what we're doing. And on the reviewer side, what we've started to do for a number of years now is actually reach out to some reviewers to initiate a dialogue. Sometimes it's, you know, tell us about this because the context in which it's written has offended the applicant, and what did you mean? Sometimes it's that, you know, this isn't to our standard. You aren't justifying your rating with comments. You know, so we work with the reviewers. There's been cases that have been egregious where we say, we're not going to ask this person to review anymore. You know, we start from the position that you're all volunteers, you're giving your time, we're a community, you know, you take from the system, you give back. So most people want to do it for the right reasons, but if people aren't doing it and making comments that are egregious, you know, there's more people to fill in. So it really depends on the nature of what is said to you. But if we want to improve the system, it's important that we see this. And Nadia's identified, and Sammy, some of the stuff we do systemically, right? Like we read through reviews, we ask chairs and SOs who's good and who maybe needs improvement, but this is another important part of the process. So please send it to us. You know, it's not appropriate to send it to the chair and the SO of the panel, although we may choose to reach out to the chair and the SO of the panel to understand from their perspective the concern that's being raised by the applicant. You know, if it's about the SO notes or the review, how the reviewer behaved at the meeting. So there's a machine underneath that's not always obvious, that's really trying to look at the quality of our system. It's not perfect, no human process ever will be, but we want to keep raising the bar.
I see there is other question, but I'm told by Linda and Nadia that apparently we should move to review. So maybe.
What I can do is I can just tend to the questions in chat while the presentation's going on.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. So let's move to the part 2 of this presentation. It's entitled How to Improve Peer Review Assessments. So let's begin by going over some of the do's and don'ts of peer review. So what are some of the do's of peer review? So we based this list based on our experience and a compilation of advice that we have posted on other funding agencies. So here are some helpful tips on writing a successful peer review. Do refer to the funding opportunity and peer review manual. It is critical that reviewers take the time to review the funding opportunity and guidelines before peer reviewing. The details are important, and they are often cited by complainants as a reason for a re-review. Moreover, evaluation criteria can be modified in recurring FOs, and these new requirements could have an impact on the content of your reviews. Do take advantage of online reviewer training modules and webinars. There is a lack of resources for reviewers in terms of peer review training. CIHR is taking the lead in this area by developing new learning modules that support excellence in peer review, such as modules on conducting quality reviews, awareness of unconscious bias, and appropriate participation and responsiveness in peer review. We encourage reviewers to have a look at these videos posted on our website. Do provide constructive and objective feedback for all education criteria. This is in line with the review quality criteria we discussed beforehand. Remember how important and useful it is for applicants to receive this feedback. Do ensure your scores and comments are aligned. The rating scale we provided to you for today's exercise should be part of every competition's peer review manual. It should help you on the expectations in your comments. For example, for CIHR's project competition, a rating between 3.5 and 3.9 is considered good, which means that although the application can excel in some areas and reasonably address other areas, some improvements are necessary, and reviewers are expected to address, in their scientific opinion, what improvements are necessary. Do use a neutral, non-biased, concise, and professional language. Using neutral language maintains objectivity and courtesy in peer reviews. It is a hallmark of good science communication. Using non-neutral language may not cross the line of being unprofessional, but they are borderline and could allow subjectivity and bias to overwhelm constructive criticism. Non-neutral language serves only to reflect the writer's attitude, emotional state, or subjective view. I'll give you examples of non-neutral words in a following slide. So what are some of the don'ts to peer review? Don't submit brief reviews. We realize that peer reviewing is a volunteer, uncompensated task, but it is critical to applicants that they receive a robust review. The adage is that you should review for others as you would have others review for you. Don't include any information that would disclose your identity. This would break the confidentiality agreement reviewers agreed to prior to peer reviewing. There is a risk to impartiality if applicants are able to identify reviewers in their reviews. Don't mention scores within your assessment comments. Scores entered into ResearchNet are usually initial scores and don't accurately reflect your final score. Also, you could end up changing your score in the rating box, but forget to change it in your review. Therefore, best practice is not to include scores in your reviews at all. Don't state that you lack expertise within your review. Your lack of expertise should already have been dealt with during the ability to review stage of the peer review process. And it is not uncommon to have reviewers who may have a medium level of expertise to review an application. However, stating it in your review threatens the integrity of the peer review process, and applicants question the fairness of the review. Don't use comments from another reviewer's assessment. We routinely encounter complaints on a reviewer copying another reviewer's reviews. This is a high-risk move and can have implications on your reputation and lead to an ethical review by the Secretariat on responsible conduct of research. And finally, don't use hostile, sexist, racialized, ageist, or inappropriate language. These are obvious no-nos and will guarantee in resulting in a complaint from the applicant, which could mean that the College of Reviewers, the Secretariat, or your own institution reach out to you for an explanation. What are some of the words and phrases to avoid in review? So I've grouped these words and phrases into 4 categories. The first group, young, lady, or guy. Grant seems to be written by a student, naive. Now this first group of words could be interpreted as ageist, sexist, or insulting to the writer. We all know that rejection is always difficult, but reviews that use words that are non-relevant or express disdain are often the hardest for recipients to deal with. Useless, boring, annoying, desperate, a mess, embarrassment. These words are really centering on the feelings of the reviewer. These are subjective adjectives and nouns. They reflect the personal opinion of the reviewer that reasonable people could disagree about. Therefore, they have no place in peer review. Shopping list, fishing expedition. These words may be a surprise to you on this list, but they do insult the legitimacy of the research proposal. They qualify the application as aimless and can be interpreted by the applicant as stating that the application is a waste of time and money. not exactly neutral language. They would be considered non-neutral language because it shows the subjective stance of the reviewer and can unfairly bias your fellow reviewers because it is hard to separate the content from the expressive noise. The words of obviously, disappointingly, these represent the attitude of the reviewer that unnecessarily colors the truths of the statements that follow. The words didn't even, barely, just. These are used to minimize, dismiss, or depreciate the content of the main sentence. For example, this is just an hypothesis. It's good practice to remember that when you're reviewing the submission, not the person or the experience of reading the application. Now let's hear from Norman and his personal experiences as a reviewer and as chair. I think you're on mute now.
Thanks, Sammy. I think a lot of wise words in what you said. Let me just add that I'm just riffing off some of your the words that you've chosen. Some of the words that are not necessarily pejorative, but they could come across as pejorative that don't have sufficient explanation attached to them are words like, well, this is merely descriptive versus mechanistic. Now you're hearing from me, I'm largely a preclinical researcher. I'm involved in mechanistic research a lot of the time. I sit on panels that explore such issues. And, it's sort of a slap in the head when somebody says, well, this is merely descriptive. Of course, all research begins to be descriptive because you need to have a body of data no matter what you're describing. But then the question is, does it go deeper than that? And so here reviewers really have to get specific. This is what I mean by what I say versus just using taglines that can really get under the skin of individuals who are working hard on their applications. The other word that really gets under people's skin is incremental. Because reviewers, applicants will respond and say, well, what's wrong with you? Of course, all progress is incremental, largely is a giant leap taken at one point. So what exactly do you mean by that? It's on us as reviewers. And then the other comment I'd make as a form issue, if people don't like using too much ink, is some people spend a lot of time describing what's in the application, but very little time, very little ink, providing critical commentary. If you're going to use ink, flip the order of that. Forget describing everything that's in the application because it's already there, and spend a lot more time describing what the strengths and the weaknesses and the issues for consideration are, and substantiating those if you're going to spend time writing. That's my advice about that. Because most applicants, when they read the reviews, they simply skim over what the summary is because they already know what it's in there. I mean, it's basically, okay, and most people are cutting and pasting anyway when they do that. They're going in and they're taking the summary of what the applicant already wrote in order to populate that zone. So it's not very novel. Okay, so review quality really matters. Well, I think that point's been made over and over again very well. Your review really influences the scoring of your fellow panel members. I cannot emphasize that enough. And as a chair of a panel, I can see myself asking questions of the reviewers in order to understand what the meaning of a 3.7 is versus a 4.1, and asking for detailed and specific criteria that mean it should be a 3.7 versus a 4.1 or a 4.4. And panel members are really listening. And I can't emphasize that enough. They are sitting with their computers, looking at the summary page, looking at the CV in order to try to understand this application. And then they're really listening to this conversation to decide where they should score. And if your recommendation is loose and not well substantiated, they're not going to score with you. They're going to score away from you. And so that's may not what you're intending as a reviewer. So you build your capacity to engage productively with fellow reviewers with differing opinions. This is very important because inevitably there are differences of opinions in many applications. They may be small differences of opinion. Sometimes there are big differences of opinion. If you have a general take on an application, you're not going to compete well in the competition for ideas and persuasion as to where this application should land. And so again, this is like going to court. You know, this is, you're competing with arguments and they have to be well substantiated, or else the judge says, I'm sorry. And then a good chair will say, you know what, I understand you feel strongly about this, but I'm not hearing why.
Mhm.
I can hear myself saying that. You provide guidance to the applicants, effective versus confusing. There's no question applicants who receive specific guidance, even if it's not in the form of recommendations, but it's just in the way of adjudication, really appreciate that. You can build a strong positive reputation among your peers. That, I think, is an important byproduct. People get to know you and they realize, you know, what your capability is. And that penetrates a lot of different arenas, even when you don't know it. Next slide, please. Is that me or?
Sorry, 1 second.
I think you went backwards. That's all.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah. So, you know, so I've chaired panel at the Kidney Foundation. I chaired panel at CIHR. And, you know, I think at the CIHR was a very more, well, both were very heterogeneous panels. So you're, as chair, you know, you're often dealing with things that you don't know a lot about. And of course, me personally, I don't know much about anything. So I'm always learning. And so you know, you're really looking for the argument versus being the content expert. Does the argument seem to hold water? You know, there are other experts in the room. Do they think it holds water? So my experience as chair is harness the people in the room, know who's in the room and who you can talk to say, does that make sense to you? Do you think, you know, and so on. I always looked for big issues versus little issues. Some people have a tendency to pick on the tiniest little things and make a big deal about it. And, you know, that really gets under the skin of applicants. You want the big issues versus the little issues. You know, no application is perfect. And so even applications that get a 4.7 have a little thing here and there, but the big stuff is great. And, you know, it really motivates a high score. Some applications are quite different and they have big issues. And you want to make sure people get it. This is a big problem. AIM 3 is not okay. That's a killer. Or, you know, so very important to be clear about that. Broad strokes versus specific observations. We've talked about that a lot. Lack of details that are grounded in fact versus your personal opinion. It's great that you think the world is square, but the problem is that almost everybody else thinks it's round. So rational judgments, incremental versus game-changing. So this is important. I think I've said, if you're going to say it's incremental, you got to say why. If you think this is a game-changing experiment or a study, that's important to say, and here's why it's game-changing potentially. Evaluation of the quality of data, published versus unpublished, is very important because people do present data in their papers and in the application, and versus generalities or indices, like a substitute variable is, you know, it only had 14 citations last year, therefore, well, it's a mediocre publication, who cares? It turns out it's terrific science, somebody else says. Well, okay. Informed evaluation of the research proposal based on the criteria, and the criteria are clear, you know, in terms of what we look at and why we look at it. And it's important to be clear about that and detail. Give a critical but fair and reasonable evaluation. We've talked about that. And be consistent. Now, of course, the applicants won't see that because they only have one application or two in a panel, but the other people see it, meaning your fellow reviewers. And so I think consistency is very important and to be clear about where you're having trouble. I think one of the things that reviewers can be very open about with each other is to say, you know what, I'm having a hard time judging this. I'd like to hear from my peers what they think about this. I'm not sure about these publications, you know. They're in the Journal of Irreproducible Results, it's a widely read journal, but I'm concerned, what do other people think? I'm on the fence. Or this experiment, I'm not that happy about it. I'm happy to take feedback. I think this engenders a sense of openness and dialogue, which is the reason we have peer review panels in the first place. Otherwise, we just send everything in by mail and call it a day. So it's a balance of bringing stuff to the table and also interacting. And I think people respect a little modesty on the part of the reviewer to say, I'm not ever knowledgeable about everything. I can integrate from what my peers are telling me in order to help everybody with what the final score should be. Over to you again, Sammy.
Okay.